Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 15th of April, 2025. And it is tax day for those in the States. Hopefully, you guys got your tax done. But April 15th won't be just remembered for getting your taxes done, because it was a landmark moment in not just maybe in boxing history or in combat sports history, but maybe in sports history that lives through the minds of all sports fans and entertainment fans all across the world, all across the globe. No way to describe this other than the fact if you've seen it, you know what it's about. And we're going to relive it tonight. The spectacle for this was the outdoor ring at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. It was the clash for the undisputed middleweight championship between Marvelous Marvin Hagler and the Hitman Thomas Hearns. The middle of the Four Kings era, the gold standard of the 80s, the peak of its era when the 80s just was mainstream when it came to the sport of boxing across the television sets. And this one was basically at its apex. This fight, basically, synopsis before I dig into details, probably the most spontaneous, combustible fight in boxing history, a violent night that basically to where it was probably the most breathtaking night for anyone who was watching the fight on television, calling the fight for whatever respective broadcasts, or anyone who covered the fight or was at the fight at Las Vegas on this particular night. And boy, it was breathtaking, and it's something that sticks in the minds of fans and everyone across the globe forever and ever and ever. And its time in history will forever be placed in stone. This came after the brief retirement of Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran having just been pasted by Thomas Hearns. This fight was originally supposed to set for May of 1982. It's supposed to be fought in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. A lot of reasons for why it didn't take place. It was simply because, supposedly Thomas Hearns had a pinky finger injury, and it set off Marvin Hagler, and to where Hagler basically said if he was man enough, he should cut that pinky and let's go through with the fight. Basically, it turned out that there was issues as to where the fight wanted to take place because the Hearns camp wanted that fight in Detroit, Michigan, in the Pontiac Silverdome. For those who remember, the giant dome in Detroit that hosted WrestleMania 3 with Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, and was host to the prime years of the standout NFL running back Barry Sanders. They thought they could have sold 90,000 for an event like that, which they probably could have. And of course, there's also issues with TV, closed circuit versus HBO. Neither camps could agree on it. So the 82 fight was just basically postponed. Now, how do we get to this point? Well, let's start with Marvin Hagler. Born and raised out of Brockton, Massachusetts, the home of the iconic Rocky Marciano, looking to carve his name into the boxing world. Made his splash on a doubleheader with Sugar Ray Leonard on November 30th, 1979 on free TV, ABC Wide World of Sports, when he fought the middleweight champion Vito Antuofermo. That particular fight, Hagler controls virtually the entire fight, winning at least 11 of the 15 rounds, but somehow 2 of the 3 judges called the fight even, and Vito Antuofermo basically is free from having to lose his title to Marvin Hagler. At the time, was considered the most egregious decision in boxing history, and it's still one of the most egregious ones ever. But it lit a fire in Marvin Hagler to where he essentially said he's going to let the fist do the talking, and it basically did from there until the night of April 15, 1985. As it was chronicled before, he flew to England to fight the middleweight champion Alan Minter, and in a basically a race-filled verbal war between the two of them, where basically Alan Minter just spit all kinds of unnecessary terminology toward Hagler. Hagler had another fighter lit in him, so he took it out on Minter, basically got a 3rd round stoppage where he just gave Minter the beating of his life and hit his crowning moment to become the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. Now, in typical Marvin Hagler fashion, never got a chance to celebrate it in the ring simply because it was littered with beers and debris, among many other things, from the crowd in England who saw their hometown hero at the time, Alan Minter, just get battered and bruised. And basically, Hagler and the Petronellis, his management team, had to cover him up and just escort out of the ring without further damage because chaos and riots were ensuing on that particular night in London. He makes a couple successful title defenses, and we talked about the Hearns' original schedule for 1982. Fight was postponed because supposedly Hearns had an injury, but a supposed injury per se, which ticked off Hagler. We're in an interview where he basically said, if someone gave me $1 million, I'd cut off that pinky finger myself. Basically, he was livid that a chance for him to fight one of the premier fighters of the time in Thomas Hearns went down the tubes simply because they couldn't get anything legitimately negotiated and the supposed injury that was. So fast forward 6 months. The name that now comes up, Sugar Ray Leonard. He was invited to a Baltimore banquet by Leonard that featured guys like Howard Cosell and Muhammad Ali to raise some kind of a fundraiser. And it was at that particular fundraiser, people were expecting Leonard to announce a fight with Marvin Hagler. Turns out Sugar Ray Leonard openly admitted that the fight with Hagler was going to be the biggest fight ever, but it would never materialize, essentially calling Ray Leonard into retirement at the time. Marvin Hagler basically said, I'm not buying into it. He'll be back at some point. But Hagler kept trucking along. About a year later, he steps into the ring with the legendary Roberto Duran in the toughest fight of Hagler's career at that point. For the first 10 or 11 rounds of the fight, it was a tactical affair to where Marvin Hagler struggled at some points to get off on Roberto Duran. It has been said that Hagler gave Duran too much respect due to the iconic stature of the great Roberto Duran. But in the last 4 rounds of the fight, Hagler buckled down and basically, training on the old scorecards, won the last 4 rounds to find a way to maintain his undisputed middleweight championship of the world. So that was the Marvin Hagler angle. He did have another title defense against Mustafa Hamsho, which he stopped Hamsho to set up the April 15, 1985 showdown with Hearns. The Hearns angle from the Croc Gym in Detroit, Michigan. You know the story of the Croc Gym for those living in Detroit, Michigan. You know about the standout fighters from Detroit, most notably Sugar Ray Robinson and Joe Louis, 2 of the top 4 fighters to ever lace up the gloves in boxing history, pound for pound. Hearns trying to carve his niche. Was known to have a tough amateur loss with Aaron Pryor early in the Olympics. He started his career just steamrolled through the opposition. Tony landed a title shot in 1980 against a standout Mexican named Pepino Cuevas. And in that fight, in the second round, a laser right hand right on the head of Pepino Cuevas had him spinning like a top until he melted onto the canvas. And Thomas Hearns would win the welterweight championship of the world. After a couple title defenses, he was calling for a all welterweight unification fight with Sugar Ray Leonard to determine the undisputed welterweight champion of the world. And it was set for September 16, 1981. Basically, the super fight everyone was clamoring for. Sugar Ray Leonard at his peak, Thomas Hearns at his peak. Back and forth fight both ways. So many twists and turns, so many storylines in that particular fight. And basically, it was a case of 1 minute, Hearns was a puncher, Leonard was a boxer. Leonard was eventually the puncher, Hearns was a boxer. And even though Thomas Hearns was ahead on the scorecards, he gradually fatigued, and Leonard basically poured it on in the 12th, 13th, and 14th rounds to get the stoppage win and become the undisputed welterweight champion. But on the Hearns angle, it was basically a state where even though he lost, his stature rose to show the whole world that he can compete at that level, despite losing to the great Ray Leonard. He would venture up to the super welterweight division, and after a couple fights, fought the standout Wilfred Benitez for the super welterweight championship and won a closer than expected decision win, because the fight wasn't as close as the scores had it. Thomas Hearns did everything he wanted to do to Wilfred Benitez. So a few fights later, we're going to fast forward to June 13th, 1984. Thomas Hearns is now fighting Roberto Duran. It may be the most cold-blooded, thrilling moments in boxing history, maybe also unforeseen. It was the second round where it was the 1-2 right on the chin of Duran by Hearns, and Roberto Duran's on the splat on your face position with your butt in the air, and the fight's basically over as the image of Roberto Duran sleeping on the canvas, courtesy of the 1-2 by Thomas Hearns, which is his signature punch. And Thomas Hearns got the keystone moment of his career, getting the win over Roberto Duran. And it was after that fight, Thomas Hearns called for a fight with Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And it was set. Now on the CBS replay version of the fight, which featured Hearns in the studio with Britt Musburger, they invite Marvin Hagler into the studio from his home in Brockton, Massachusetts. And basically Marvin Hagler, who's still ticked off at the original postponement of 1982, and still ticked off because that was the moment he was working hard for, basically told Tommy Hearns, I'm finally going to get you in the ring, and when I get you in the ring, I'm going to break every bone in your body. And the buildup started. The contract was signed April 15th, 1985, Caesars Palace at Las Vegas, Nevada, the place where legends are made, and boy, was this a legend to even be thought of. The press had 21 cities, 12 days, hostile, intense press conferences, intense face-offs, words exchanged to try and build up the fight in ways like none other. Both guys now with Sugar Ray Leonard out of the shadow and Roberto Duran, being Roberto Duran, were wanting for this moment in the spotlight, and both guys were going to sell this fight as if whoever won it was going to be the spotlight of everything in the sport of boxing at that point. And both guys, when they sold this fight at the pressers, it was all over the place. I mean, intense face-offs. Tommy Hearns guaranteeing a third-round knockout over Marvin Hagler. Marvin Hagler telling Tommy Hearns when he fights Hearns, it will be Hearns' last fight. And some of the most intense face-offs when they face off you'll ever see. Because it was a moment each fighter worked hard for, the moment each fighter wanted, especially with Sugar Ray Leonard retired. And now the fun is about to begin. Because now Marvin Hagler is walking around with a hat with the title War on it. Basically, that was his attitude approaching this fight, war. That's his mindset. He even said it himself. The mindset was going to be to take the fight to Thomas Hearns simply because he didn't want to let Thomas Hearns get off. So we approached the fight night, and both fighters entered the ring. Both fighters extremely confident. And during the national anthem, the intense face-off between Hagler and Hearns continued. Even Richard Steele, who refereed the fight, basically said, I never seen a fight where the fighters looked at each other and there was hot tension taking place. The vivid image is still Marvin Hagler in that corner during the referee's introductions, pounding himself on his own head. And basically one of the respected news panelist named Ed Schuyler basically said, one more punch by Hagler to himself, he was going to knock himself out. So Marvin Hagler was pumped. Thomas Hearns was pumped. The crowd was pumped. Everybody was ready. Sugar Ray Leonard, sideline, who's calling the HBO replay version of the fight. And basically you had the moment we've all waited for. We consider from the postponement in 1982 to what took place 40 years ago today. And basically when the bell sounded, neither guy took a backward step. Basically, Hagler initiated the action, an overhand right hook, even though he missed. But a second time it came in, here comes two more right hands by Thomas Hearns. Hagler's trying to fire back. Hearns is trying to fire back. Hagler's trying to fire back. And now all hell breaks loose. And now both guys are punching each other simultaneously. Two all-time greats at the peak of their career, fighting for the ultimate prize, the undisputed middleweight championship, just letting it go. And now we have fireworks and a violent night that basically is going to be remembered as the most unforgettable ever. Basically, when you're watching this fight, especially back then with the antenna, with the bunny ears wrapped in aluminum foil, you had this weird fear that they were punching each other so hard, they was going to pop through your television screen because they were just letting it go and letting it go. I mean, Hagler kept pushing the issue. Hearns try to stay away, try to establish his jab. And every time Hagler comes in, Hearns is trying to time him. Even though he's hitting Hagler, he's starting to not hurt Hagler. As Haglers keep coming in, pinning Hearns on the ropes. As he's winning away to Hearns' body, Hearns is trying to counter off the ropes. And basically, we're having a wild affair. And it's gotten even more wilder. And they're just trading and trading and trading. And a 3-minute affair that felt like 10 minutes because it felt like the round was never going to end with all the fierce action between both of them. And basically, there's an image still of the corner where now all of a sudden there's a cut on Marvin Hagler, drenched in his face, but he's still just pinning Hearns and just wailing away. And while Hearns is still pinned on the ropes, he's trying to counter all he can to keep Hagler off of him. And now they're just clashing and basically just letting it go. 30 seconds left in the round. A right hand by Hagler hurts Hearns, pushes Hearns away. But as Hagler tries to come in, here comes Hearns, basically timing it with a couple of uppercuts. Hagler counters with a right hook. Back comes Hearns. Back comes Hagler. And basically, for the last 30 seconds, more exchanges until the bell finally sounds. And Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, from the crowd to the commentators to all the people in press row, with their jaws about as wide open as a national tit because no one expected this to happen. And as the round came to a close, basically every panelist called it the greatest round of boxing history. As the great Al Michaels, who called the pay-per-view version of the fight perfectly said, the round was an entire fight in a compass of 3 minutes because that's what Hagler-Hearns round 1 was. 2 elite level fighters at the purest peaks, the peak of all peaks, basically saying, we're not going to deal with strategy. We're just going to throw it down. And that's what they did for the first 3 minutes. And boy, fireworks were set off all over the place. And basically shockwaves all across Caesar's Palace and all over your television screens. Because no way anyone could foresee this. Now, for everything like this, there's always something in boxing. There's always some kind of drama that follows. And it turns out the first right hand that Hearns hit Hagler with was high on the head. And it broke his hand. Think about this for a second. You're Thomas Hearns with a broken hand, and you're going toe-to-toe, punch for 3 minutes in the greatest round in boxing history with Marvin Hagler, basically as a one-handed fighter. Says a lot to the heart that Thomas Hearns had throughout his entire career. I mean, his heart's probably as big as the entire United States of America. That should tell you about what Tommy Hearns was. But basically, a lot of people on the scorecards who try to score the first round put a big X through it because they just enjoyed the round and didn't want to score the round simply because it was just something that they would just sit back and enjoy and not even try to analyze. Even Al Michaels and Al Bernstein, who called the pay-per-view closed circuit version, couldn't even try to go punch for punch and just went to basic analysis because you couldn't even try to keep up with the punches they were throwing and landing in the first round. It was just breathtaking. It was mind-blowing. And basically, it's like a new standard was set when it comes to championship level fighting, not just in boxing, but in combat sports, especially at that level when you have 2 of the premier fighters of that time fighting each other at their pure peaks and just letting their hands go. That's what happened with them in round 1. And it's still widely regarded the greatest round ever, which I'll talk about here in a second. Fast forward to round 2. Basically, don't know how you're going to top round 1 because I don't think you could ever top round 1 of that fight. So now strategies are now established. Hearns trying to establish his jab. Hagler turns righty, which he was successful in his career both as a righty and a lefty, despite being a southpaw throughout his entire career. Basically, Hearns was able to try and get his jab going, but his legs were starting to show some kind of weird rubberish reaction as the round was progressing. As he was trying to utilize the ring, Hagler kept coming, kept taking the fight to Hearns, and as the round started to come to an end, another left-right combination by Hagler pins Hearns against the ropes, but the second Hearns' back touches the ropes, he's trying to fire back on Hagler to keep Hagler off of him. And they're wailing away and wailing away and wailing away for the last 30 seconds of that round. But as the round ended, the cut that Hagler had at the end of the first round reopened itself as round 2 came to a close. The Petronelli's trying to do everything they can to minimize that cut, but it's deep. It looked like it was appear high on the forehead. Nobody knew where exactly the cut was, and nobody knew where exactly it came from. But a real point of the storyline was the legs of Tommy Hearns was just starting to wear down suddenly, like out of nowhere. I mean, as the round ended, you start to see a little jitter in Hearns' step as the legs were wearing out. So we fast forward to round 3. Again, Hearns trying to box and stay away. Hagler's coming. He pins Hearns against the ropes, gets a combination off. As Hearns is turning away, the blood on Hagler again revigorates itself. And out of nowhere, Richard Steele unexpectedly calls a timeout in the middle of the fight to have a doctor look at the cut on Marvin Hagler. In the middle of all that action that's gone on, in the middle of all the action, a timeout is called so we can have a referee look at the cut. And he takes him over to the doctor. One simple question is, can you see? Marvin Hagler says yes. And the doctor tells Richard Steele to let the fight go. And there's a subplot about the cut I'll touch on here in a minute. So here we are back to the fight. And Hearns still on rubbery legs. Hagler still chasing. About 45 seconds after the doctor's stoppage, the big right hook by Hagler spins Hearns around. 2 more right hooks. After the second one, he's leaning on Hagler and a soft left hook to the body. And Thomas Hearns is down and flat on his back. Out of nowhere, just gradually worn down, flat on his back. And basically, the referee is counting over him. You think for a minute Hearns is not going to get up. But here he is trying everything he can with all of his heart and his will to pull himself up. He beats the count at 9. And as referee Richard Steele rubs his gloves off and asks Tommy Hearns if he's okay, Hearns, fatigued and leg worn, just collapses under Richard Steele. And as he's collapsing, the fight is over. And the keystone moment of Marvin Hagler's career that he worked so hard for, going back to his amateur days to that night 40 years ago today, he finally reached it. And he won by the technical knockout in the 3rd round and retains an undisputed middleweight championship, which turned out to be his 11th successful title defense. The moment Marvin Hagler worked as hard as you possibly could for, he finally reached the goal, finally reached the pinnacle, the stature of the best fighter in the world, pound for pound, and something he couldn't do in the Alan Minter fight because of all the debris that took place overseas. He finally had the chance to have the big smile, pump his fist, walk around the ring in a victory parade, and is hoisted in the air and is celebrating as he finally reached the pinnacle he's been trying to get for his entire professional career. And what a 8-minute showdown the two fighters had. For Marvin Hagler, got to that point, the image of Tommy Hearns being carried after the fight onto the corner, where Hearns was basically tired, gassed, and hurt. And he's being carried into his own corner, and doctors are looking at him, making sure he's okay. But that image is still one that's for the record books. And when you think about the Tommy Hearns aspect of this, you think of two things. Him being carried out of the ring after he was floored, largely because he was gassed. And of course, like the Leonard fight 4 years before, enhanced his image as a warrior who basically was willing to take on anyone and everyone and give us best effort, because he certainly did that. He just met a fighter named Marvelous Marvin Hagler, who was determined not to lose this fight by any means necessary. And that's what happened. Marvin Hagler, your winner by TKO in the 3rd round to retain the undisputed middleweight championship of the world. His place in history secure. His stature rose to the best fighter of the world. The spotlight of everything in the sport at that point, when you consider Sugar Ray Leonard having been retired, which he was basically calling the fight on HBO. And he basically got a lot of endorsement deals out of it. Got some commercials with Pizza Hut and Right Guard deodorant. Had some appearances on the Johnny Carson late night show. And now he was a talk of the town. This was the moment he wanted. And he finally accepted Marvelous Marvin Hagler as the best fighter in the world, which is something he's always wanted to do. Did anything and everything he could to get to that point. And don't think for 1 second, if you guys that know the career and the hell Marvin Hagler went through. Don't think for 1 second when Richard Steele stopped the fight to have the doctor look at the cut. He was thinking, here we go again. Everything I worked hard for, the boxing intelligentsia is going to try and take it away from me. Because you know the story about Marvin Hagler. The boxing intelligentsia was just rubbed off the wrong way when it came to him. And he wanted to show he belonged in the sport. And when that timeout happened, and when he came back out, he made sure to take care of business and just dispose of the great Thomas Hitman Hearns. And what a spectacular fight it was. I mean, before the fight, all kinds of validity and all kinds of trash talking per usual. Now, what they are is basically members of probably the most violent, most spontaneous, combustive fight in boxing history. One of those nights where you just take two dynamites, put them together, watch an explosion, and a real fire comes out. That's what took place 40 years ago today between between Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Thomas the Hitman Hearns, with Sugar Ray Leonard doing the commentary for the HBO replay version of it. So that's what Leonard was doing while Hagler and Hearns were just going all out, especially in that first round, which is widely regarded the greatest round in boxing history. You want to know how it's regarded as such? There's a show in 1990 called The Greatest Rounds Ever on NBC. 4 standout boxing aficionados, Don Dunphy, George Benton, Archie Moore, and Angelo Dundee, all with the deep history they have, and they've been through and seen it all. From their time to the present before they all left this earth, all called Hagler-Hearns round 1 the greatest round ever, across the board. And they've seen a lot of great rounds. They've seen a lot of great fights. And they could have gone any way they wanted, given what they've seen. But they all unanimously called Hagler-Hearns round 1 the greatest round in boxing history. And that is where the stature is. Still widely regarded with that distinction, rightfully so and understandably so. And it's basically another etch in history for the sport at a time when the best fought the best at their respective best without any stipulations, without any worry about who the A side or the B side is, without worrying about who gets the greater pay cut, without worrying about political aspects of the sport. Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns, at their purest peaks, already an all-time great stature, just said, the heck with it. We're going to throw down. Forget strategy. It's going to be about who takes whose punch better, who has the bigger heart, who has the bigger will, and the greater desire to win. And Marvin Hagler, given what he worked hard for, was not leaving Caesar's palace without his hand raised that night 40 years ago today. What a moment for Marvin Hagler. What a moment for the sports. And definitely what a moment for Thomas Hearns. Because after this fight, Hearns did go on to win 3 more world titles. When he beat a fighter named Juan Roldan, is about a year and a half after this, he became the first fighter ever to win world titles in 4 weight classes at a time when multiple weight division championships meant something. Being the first to do it said a lot for him at that time. He did go on to beat Dennis Andres to win a light heavyweight championship. Although somewhere down the line, he lost to Iran Barkley, the first of their 2 fights. Came back against Virgil Hill in 91, where basically he was pegged as an opponent for Hill. Basically took Virgil Hill to school and basically wanted a sizable unanimous decision. And basically his last great fight before he lost the light heavyweight title and a rematch to Iran Barkley. But Thomas Hearns, a part of the 4 Kings with Hagler, Leonard, and Duran. Maybe his biggest misfortune in this sense was coming around at a time when Hagler, Duran, and Leonard were around, because he was a terrifically great fighter. Those 3 will always have the greater stature in history, even though Thomas Hearns did wipe out Roberto Duran in 2 rounds and gave Hagler and Leonard all they can handle. They'll both will tell you that. But Tommy Hearns' history is an all-time great, rightfully in the Hall of Fame. And when you talk about some of the pure single punchers in boxing history, that right cross, if he hit it on you, you're seeing stars. Pino Cuevas and Roberto Duran will tell you that. So that's the legacy of Thomas Hearns. Just a misfortune of coming around when guys like Hagler and Leonard were the king of the crop. Definitely an all-time great. Was in the middle of the 4 Kings of that time. Of course, the story with Hagler, fought a year later after this to beat John Mugabe, lost a controversial decision to Ray Leonard in 87, but did the one thing very few fighters, very few athletes find it tough to do. He walked away from an eight-figure payday for a Leonard rematch because of the manipulation by Ray Leonard, telling Ray Leonard to go stick it, retired, and stayed retired, and never stepped foot in the boxing ring again. Went on to Italy and make movies, made appearances here and there all over the place. But when he left in 87 after the loss of Leonard, that was it. He basically said he was not going to let boxing use him. When the Leonard fight ended, that's what the end of the day was for him. What a terrific career for both of them, and what a night. You talk about part of this Four Kings era from 1980 to 1987, starting with Leonard Duran won in June of 80 in Montreal, ending in Leonard Hagler in 87 at Caesar's Palace in Vegas. All four guys fought each other. That's what a Four Kings is. The Four Kings is four guys digging in the ring, and they all fight each other. That's what made from 1980 to 1987 their era, their time, and perhaps a magical moment in boxing history. And it was basically the top of all the news waves, not just sports news, but all the late night news, even with all the political things going on in the 80s. The number one stories across the board from 1980 to 1987, Leonard Duran won, Leonard Duran 2, Hagler-Hearns won, Hagler-Duran, Hearns-Duran, Hagler-Hearns, Leonard Hagler. I don't count Leonard Hagler-Hearns 2 because it was 7 years past its expiration date. I don't count Leonard Duran 3 because that had no business taking place. But from the Leonard Duran 1 all the way through Leonard Hagler in 87, that's the Four Kings era. It belonged to those four guys. All four fighting each other at the very best, not caring about who was an A side, who was a B side, not caring about, among the other many things. It was about prestige. It was about legacy. It was about greatness. And that's what all four did for that 7.5-year period. Now, that's not the real. Now, that's the real Four Kings as we know it. There's a Showtime documentary on it, a 4-part series with Paramount Plus. You guys are more than welcome to watch it. But there's other Four Kings eras that maybe are in that ilk. You can probably go to 1947 to 1954 in the heavyweight division, where it was Ezra Charles, Jersey Joe Walcott, Rocky Marciano, and Joe Louis. Same thing there for that 7-year period. They all fought each other. And basically, it was the end of the Joe Louis era, transitioning to the Rocky Marciano era. But Charles and Walcott in there made their marks, and they had a 4-fight series between those two, captivating the end with the second Charles Rocky Marciano fight, which was basically the end of that run. The back end of the 70s in the heavyweight division had Muhammad Ali, Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers, and Larry Holmes. Now, remind you, this is after George Foreman had his retirement after the loss to Jimmy Young, and Joe Frazier having the 2 brutal losses to Ali in the Thriller in Manila, and then the Foreman in the rematch. Those four had a bit of a Four Kings round robin. Ali beating Norton in the 3rd fight, although some would say Norton won. He fought Ernie Shavers. Shavers fights Holmes the first time. In the middle of all of that, Holmes fights Norton in one of the breathtaking heavyweight championship fights ever. And it concluded with Holmes Shavers 2. So that was a bit of a Four Kings run from 76 to about, I would probably say 81 or 82. Actually, more on Holmes Norton in a second. So that was a Four Kings era. But no Four Kings will ever compare, ever, to what Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, and Roberto Duran did from 1980 to 1987 when they all fought each other. And basically, all about legacy, all about greatness, all about finding the best at their best. And that's something nobody before, during, or after that time can lay claim to. Because that was the era. When you talk about the gold standard, that's what it was. A gold standard that hasn't even come close to being matched since then. Some before, you could say, had their own Four Kings eras, but nothing quite like that. It was certainly a fun time in the sport of boxing, especially in the 80s. Because when those four were at it, and however you want to set it up, it was all across the news waves, and it was the main story among all the news waves, regardless of what network you was watching or whatever it was you were following at the time. You couldn't follow anything on television without anybody mentioning any of these four kings when they were fighting for that about 7 to 7.5 year period. Fun times. We're not going to get anywhere near that again, or especially on this era. Now we touch on the greatest rounds in boxing history, unanimously regarded. Marvin Hagler and Tommy Hearns, round one. No one's going to top that. Some of the ones have a legit conversation. Let's go to June 15th, 1978. Larry Holmes versus Ken Norton. Story of this one, for the heavyweight championship. All three judges had the fight even going into the 14th round. And as the 15th round started, question was, who was going to win the round? Because who won that round was going to win the fight. Started out as a Norton round and looked like he was going to control it until a right hand out of nowhere by Holmes hurts Norton. And now Holmes is controlling the second half of the round, even though Norton is trying to come back. Two of the three judges give it to Holmes. One gives it to Norton, and Holmes is a champion. But some consider round 15 of Holmes-Norton the greatest round in heavyweight championship boxing history. I tend to agree with it because it certainly was one where the proverbial who wins the round wins the fight. That one fitted to perfection because of how the judges had it. Speaking of heavyweights, let's fast forward a little bit to May of 1992, the modern Foreman Lyle. This was Michael Moorer versus Burt Cooper. Burt Cooper coming off the near upset of Evander Holyfield, had some momentum against the unbeaten Michael Moorer, who was a bit lethargic in his previous two fights. Cooper comes out as a whirlwind, gets Moorer in trouble, floors him early. Looked like he was going to get the early round knockout, but the combination by Moorer puts Cooper down. Cooper gives up, and Moorer looks like he's going to get a knockout until referee Joe O'Neill had to stop the action due to a mouthpiece coming out. And then Moorer and Cooper winning away to end round one. That's among them also. Fast forward 6 months. Maybe the more modern one for this. The first one between Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe. The uppercut by Bowe that almost sends Evander Holyfield to the moon. Actually, he hit him so hard, Evander Holyfield was on his tiptoes. Maybe put another pound on it. He probably knocks him through the roof of the Thomas and Mack Center. He controls the first half of the fight. Evander Holyfield is basically covering up, and Bowe's just wailing away trying to get a knockout. About halfway through, Riddick Bowe punches himself out, and now here comes Evander Holyfield, and now Riddick Bowe is holding on. That last 15 seconds of the round, they're trading away. Holyfield looked like he was about to get to Riddick Bowe, but the bell ends that round, and basically the wild free-for-all in that particular round was basically the emblem of what the Holyfield-Bowe trilogy was in 92, 93, and 95. Hands down, the greatest heavyweight trilogy outside of Ali Frazier. I mean, that's certainly an all-time great one. We're going to go all the way back here. This is 1946. This was Tony Zale versus Rocky Graziano. Looked like for a minute, Zale was going to get to Graziano, floors him. But Rocky Graziano comes back and basically beats up Graziano. Rocky Graziano rises up and beats up Tony Zale at the end of the round. Looked like he was going to come back and steal a first round knockout from Tony Zale till the bell saved it. But the turned out to be an action fight, one of the fights of the year. I believe it was the 46th fight of the year. But it turned out Zale went on to win by a knockout. But that first round was just absolutely brutal. Zale floors Graziano. Looked like he was going to win it, but a left hook out of nowhere by Graziano. Zale is on clear streak, and Graziano's wailing away, but the bell saves Tony Zale on that one. You can forget part of a 4-fight series, the face first, all you can go at it brawl between Israel Vasquez and Rafael Marquez. The third round, basically, Vasquez and Marquez is dueling it out, but Vasquez at the end of the round turns it up to the next level before he gets the 6th round knockout. That was a great round. How about the 5th round of Eric Morales versus Marco Antonio Barrera in the first of their trilogy? Start out with Morales controlling it. Barrera comes on, and now we talk about the heart of Mexican warriors. It was displayed in round 5 of that first fight. the first of an epic all-time great trilogy. That's another one that you couldn't miss. Who could forget Larry Holmes versus Tim Witherspoon in '83? For the minute, Holmes starting to control the fight, but the trademark Witherspoon right hand hurts Holmes, and it looks like Holmes is going to wind up being knocked out. But out of nowhere, a right hand by Holmes, and now Witherspoon is hurt, and now both guys are all over the place. Larry Holmes, Tim Witherspoon, round 9 was a good one. Who could forget this one in Mexico City? This was John David Jackson versus Jorge Castro, part of a Showtime pay-per-view. John David Jackson does anything and everything he wants to, and he's just controlling the fight. Then out of nowhere, a sneak left hand by Jorge Castro, and John David Jackson's life has changed forever. I mean, down goes Jackson. He gets up. Castro floors him 2 more times in a fight where John David Jackson's basically winning 8 rounds to nothing going into the 9th round. Jorge Castro comes out of nowhere and just wallops John David Jackson, and I mean wallops. Of course, who could forget this one? We're going all the way back to 1923. Jack Dempsey versus Louis Firpo. Knockdowns all over the place, but for a minute looked like Firpo was going to pull it off. Dempsey shows why he was the baddest man on the planet of the 1920s. That's why they called it the Roaring 20s on behalf of Jack Dempsey. And he showed it there where he just obliterated Firpo to win the knockout. And maybe the kingpin of them all in terms of the entire fight, maybe not one particular round. Who could forget January 24th, 1976, at the same place Hagler-Hearns took place, George Foreman, Ron Lyle. Who could forget this? Round 4, basically, Lyle opens up. He floors Foreman first. Looked like Foreman was going to be out. Foreman gets up. Then he starts to show the world why he's George Foreman. He floors Ron Lyle after a series of left hooks. Looked like Foreman was going to win. But out of nowhere, a sneak right hand by Lyle just before the 4th round ended. Foreman is down, face first on the canvas. Looked like Foreman was out, but he gets up, beats the count. He does wobble into his corner, but Foreman comes out, of course, in round 5 to stop Ron Lyle because he's George Foreman. But Lyle Foreman, round 4, was the epitome of what that fight was. Let the bodies hit the floor. A whole bunch of these I can go through, but none of those will ever compare to what took place 40 years ago today between Marvelous Marvin Hagler and Thomas the Hitman Hearns. And every time I watch that round, every time I watch that fight, it gets better and better and better. This round and this fight in that 80s era of the 4 kings of Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, Duran has aged beautifully and aged gracefully because it's still talked about. It's still watched on all the social media platforms. And that's basically forever the gold standard of what the sport should be. And we haven't come anything close to what that era was. You can dissect it any way you want. You can talk about it any way you want. You can describe it any way you want. Nothing can hold a candlelight to what this era was. I mean, it was basically 4 standout fighters, just all about fighting the best and wanting to be the best, but they wanted to be the best against each other, and they wanted to be the best against the best. That's what that era was. And as far as Hagler-Hearns is concerned, 40 years later, round 1 is still the gold standard of how championship fights should be fought. That 8-minute fight is the gold standard of how championship fights should be fought. The build-up going in is how it should always be. Fighting the best, at the best, winner takes all. No way we're going to get anything close to this ever again. A lot of, near close calls to it, but when you consider the fact that these two, and whatever happened before, during, and after, what they was able to do 40 years ago today, set the time bomb, and just lit up the fireworks at Caesar's Palace, lit it up like none other, raised it to a high-level bonfire to the greatest exchanges you can ever have. It's basically edged in time forever. And basically, what they were able to do left a breathtaking moment and certainly a memorable night that will never ever be forgotten. They say often duplicated, never intimidated. I forgot what the word is. That's excuse me, often imitated, never duplicated. Hagler-Hearns, nothing's going to come close. There's a way we can go back to the hands of time and watch this again instead of sticking to it on the YouTube videos, so we can be there and witness it in person. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the locker rooms of both fighters. I would have loved to have been the fly on the wall during the contract negotiations when this took place, because I'm sure even that would have been eventful if they would have found a way to televise those. I mean, they had the crazy press tour. I mean, you can see the bits and pieces of it on the Four Kings documentary with Paramount Plus. But boy, I'd love to have been flying the wall when all of this was taking place. It deserves its own spot in history, forever etched in history on its own. The greatest round ever, the most memorable 8-minute fight in boxing history. You could probably say the most memorable 8-minute fight in combat sports history, because you could put it all together. Nothing matches up to this. Boy, I would love to just turn back the hands of time and witness this again, especially all the fight followers who grew up watching this era. It was a thing of beauty. God rest his soul, marvelous Marvin Hagler. You gave us a lot of thrills and a lot of excitement, a lot of memories that cherish and is always going to be memorable forever. Happy 40th birthday, Hagler-Hearns. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I hope everyone has themselves a wonderful rest of the 15th of April, 2025. As always, make self-care your number one priority. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else matters. If you take care of yourself first, good things will come your way. Have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.